Welcome to the NEREJ NYREJ podcast. I'm your host, Rick Kaplan, and my guest today is Joe DiPompeo. Did I say that right?
Of course, DiPompeo.
Okay. And Joe is with Structural Workshop. And Joe, how are you, first of all?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing great. Tell us a little bit about Structural Workshop.
Sure.
Structural Workshop. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We are going to be celebrating 20 years in business in February, which kind of snuck up on me. I feel like we just celebrated 10, but I guess 20 is a bigger accomplishment also. So we've been in business for 20 years. I started in the basement office of a condo I was living in 20 years ago, and grew to about 15 employees at our peak a year ago. We've backed off a little bit, not much, but things have quieted down a little bit the past year, and I think things are starting to improve and stabilize now. So we'll probably be ramping up again shortly. And we do structural engineering primarily, but we do a lot of things that are associated with that, such as real estate due diligence, parking garage inspections, which I know we're going to talk about today. We do work for condo boards, we do a lot of forensic engineering and finding out what went wrong and how to fix it, and litigation support if needed. And we do ground up buildings and modifications to buildings, retaining walls, and anything to do with structures. And we're 75% of our work is in the New York metro area, but I'm licensed in close to 30 states. So we do cover most of the East Coast and a lot of random states throughout the country.
Great. So Joe, tell me, well, first of all, the Structural Workshop is the name of the company. It sounds almost like you do like a training for other engineers.
I've had that confusion before. No, it's not correct. I think there's two reasons the name came about. I had a list of about 10 different names, and it was the Structural Workshop name actually came from something in a game called Civilization, which was very popular 25 years ago. It was like a computer game, and I had Leonardo da Vinci's workshop, and that's where the name came from. And I had my list of 10 names. That was one of them, and that was the only domain name of the 10 names that was available for purchase at the time. So that's the one that got selected. I kind of it wasn't, I don't want to say it wasn't my first choice, but it certainly it was picked because it was the only one available.
Okay. No, that sounds fair. That sounds right. So, we want to talk about local law 126, just public garages or any kind of garage, that cars would be more than 10 or 15.
Well, what is exempted from it is 1 and 2 family houses. Other than that, well, here I can tell you right here, a garage with an occupancy of fewer than 3 cars, garages serving 1 and 2 family homes, and then parking lots and surface parking is exempt. It's any type of building that's enclosed, and any automotive repair shops or things like that are excluded. Other than that, it's anything that houses more than 3 cars, or 3 cars or more, actually.
So you're talking about like a public garage.
Yeah, I mean I'm sure there's some things on the fringes that are questionable whether they're included or not, but this is aimed at parking garages that are open to the public, that are in the city, and there's 4 of them on every block in Manhattan, obviously, but those parking garages is what this is aimed at. It's to protect the public, protect the cars, but also, this New York City has a little bit of experience with this because of Local Law 11 and some other things, but after the collapse of the Surfside building in Florida, this inspection of existing buildings is starting to get some traction nationwide, and because the report's not out on that yet, but the leading theory is that there was deterioration in the pool deck, which caused the pool deck to collapse. And once that happened, columns on the exterior of the building were now 2 stories, and they were only designed to be 1 story high, and the bracing was removed. So whether or not that's exactly what happened or not, that is certainly a plausible thing that can happen. And a lot of these parking garages are underneath very large buildings. So if the parking garage slab deteriorates and collapses, even just a section of it, certainly that's a local hazard to the cars and the people in the garage. But if you collapse enough around a column, you could collapse a building. So there is, that I think what happened in Florida certainly has brought this to the forefront. And we also had a parking garage collapse in the city in the spring, which this law predates that, but I think this certainly is going to, what happened in the spring is going to give a lot of attention to the need for this and why. And there's also some concern now with the heavier vehicles, the electric vehicles having the battery or heavier, and there is some concern that the design loads for parking garages might not be adequate going forward. But that's a very new developing thing.
So what you're saying is very scary because you're saying before, the past couple of years, there really wasn't a lot of inspections and things of that nature going on in these type of garages.
Well, smart owners did regularly maintain their garages, because the type of deterioration you see is progressive. And if you don't maintain it, it gets worse and more costly to fix. So owners that can see the benefit of spending a little money now to avoid spending a lot of money later did maintain their garages, but there's plenty that did not. And the Northeast is brutal on parking garages. We have road salts coming off the cars. There's a mix of snow and ice and road salt that gets up under the wheel wells, and the car parks, and it's warmer in the garage. It melts, puts salt water all over the slab. That seeps into the concrete, corrodes the steel. This is a well-known process that every parking garage fights from the second it's built. Going around and finding these spots, and they're almost like cavities in the beginning. You have to kind of chop it out and keep chopping out the bad stuff till you get to the good stuff, and then repair that spot. The quicker and earlier you do it, the less of an area that's going to be, and the cheaper it's going to be to repair. And it also remains a localized problem to that patch, as opposed to where you're replacing entire slabs or sections of garages. So, the smart owners that have the money to do it generally have done this on their own, but there's plenty that have not.
We drive over bridges, go through tunnels, park in these parking garages. As the average Joe, I have no clue whether they're structurally sound or not. So I'm just taking it. I'm thinking guys like you are going in there and making sure everything, and I'm sure you would go in there and you would be able to tell, well, we need to do this to make this structurally sound. If it's not done, then we could have a problem.
Correct. And go ahead.
But I just it makes I get very nervous going over bridges, so that's a fear of mine. But that's what I'm saying. How do you might go into a garage and you might see, oh, I don't think that's right, and that doesn't look like it's going to be that's deteriorating over there. I wouldn't know that. Is there? And now you're saying that they're trying to put these laws in place that someone like you will go in and inspect it and make sure that it is sturdy or will hold the load.
Right. This is very similar to Local Law 11, which has been in place for a long time in New York. And when it started, it was one of the few building codes address building the building, and then pretty much that's the end of it. The Local Law 11 has been in New York for a very long time, and that was the result of several accidents. There were some that were fatal, with things falling off the facades of buildings, or air conditioners falling out of windows, railings not being safe, and Obviously, there's danger, and especially in Manhattan, where you're in canyons of buildings and something could fall from 100 stories up and you wouldn't have a chance. So there's been a facade inspection program in New York City for a very long time, and this is very similar to that. And essentially, an engineer, well, you have to be a qualified parking structure inspector, which is an additional qualification on top of being an engineer. And it's a new qualification. There's not a lot of people that do this right now. So you have to get qualified with the New York City Department of Buildings in order to do these. And then the inspection is, a visual inspection. And then you have to do like a physical inspection of a certain percentage of the garage. And there's a minimum set, but then it's also left up to the judgment of the engineer if they want to do more or less. So typically we do an initial walkthrough, look for trouble spots. We do soundings, which are, believe it or not, with all the technology out there, one of the best ways to identify issues is called chain dragging or sounding with a hammer, where you essentially drag a chain across the slab. And when the steel swells, it pops open the slab into two pieces from the inside. And you can hear the difference between the hollow slab and the solid slab. There's just a difference in the noise that chain makes when it drags over it. Believe it or not, that is one of the best tools there is for an initial screening. And then obviously that can go much further than that, depending on the garage, to do testing, like take concrete samples or do other type of non-invasive or invasive testing. But that's kind of left up to the discretion of the engineer. And then if a report has to be filed, and that report, very similar to local law 11, can classify the garage as safe. And then if that's the case, then nothing needs to be done. It can be safe with maintenance and monitoring, which a lot of garages fall in. That basically means there's nothing dangerous, but you got to do some maintenance, you got to do some repairs, or you got to have an engineer keep an eye on things because there's things that could become a problem. A lot of garages fall into that category. And then there's unsafe condition. And if that's the case, that has to be fixed immediately. I think it's 90 days, and then you have to file a report within 2 weeks of that saying it's been fixed. So that's the initial process. A lot of the garages that fall in the middle, there's going to be a repair plan over the next several years, repair and or monitoring to make those repairs. And then when the next cycle comes around 6 years later, the idea is it'll get a clean bill of health because the issues that were picked up the first time have been fixed. So that's the basics of the program.
So as, like I say, an average Joe, I drive into a garage. Is there a sign of some kind every year that they have the inspection saying that this has been inspected? That
Not that I'm aware of, but I believe you can go on the DOB website and get, all the reports that have been filed for that building, including these as they're filed. But I can't. I expect you'll double park in front and look it up before you decide whether to pull in. Right.
So there's no
It's an interesting idea. They have signs for everything. I mean, they have the food safety grade, the efficiency grade. It's not a bad idea. But
no, you go into an elevator and they show that it's been inspected. I think it's twice a year they even inspect an elevator, and it shows who inspected it and when was last inspected. Where if something happens to an elevator, that could be like 2 people that get killed in that or injured. In a garage, it could be hundreds.
Indeed. So yeah, I that's actually a very very interesting question. I'm not the person to bring it up with. You probably got to talk to DOB, but that is a good idea.
So now you only do this in New York and New Jersey?
No, we have an office in our main office is in Mountain Lakes, New Jersey, and then we have an office in Easton, Pennsylvania, and we have one in Pompano Beach, Florida. So we the local law 126 inspections are specific to New York City, and they're on a schedule. The ending this year is Manhattan, south of Central Park, and a little bit of the Upper West Side, and then the rest of Manhattan and Brooklyn starts January 1st for 2 years, and then Queens, Staten Island, the Bronx is the next 2-year cycle. So any garages in Manhattan on the Upper West Side or south of Central Park are due by the end of the year. So if anybody doesn't know about this, you have to get moving on it now. But we do parking garage investigations and repairs anywhere. This is the only place where it's under such a strict New York State has a similar inspection requirement, but it's much less stringent and involved than this. But we also Florida has a lot of requirements that some of them were in place in some counties prior to the collapse that happened. It's now statewide where buildings need to be recertified after certain time periods, 30, 40, 50 years, and that's for structural, facade, and electrical. So that, and Jersey City, New Jersey has put in a program of facade inspections, and then on bigger buildings, structural foundation and structure inspections of buildings. And Cliffside Park has, and there is a bill in New Jersey to potentially make this statewide. So this is becoming a thing that wasn't really a thing before. Mandated regular inspections of existing structures. It's becoming something that at some point might be a national, essentially.
Now, if a building is or a garage closer to the ocean, because it's all salt water, would they require more maintenance? I would think they would.
Well, you got to remember that parking garages are getting inundated with salt. Parking garages in the Northeast or the Midwest and anywhere that has snow, they are getting inundated with salt off the tires. Now, there are ways to control that. There are membrane systems you can put on top of the slab that are intended to bear traffic and keep water from touching the concrete. There's more extensive and expensive systems where you can actually have a topping slab where the slab you're driving on is only a couple inches thick and is only intended to be sacrificial, like absorb all that stuff and essentially disintegrate. And then at some point in time, you chop it out and pour a new one on top. There are things you can do, but the salt that, a regular parking garage, most parking garages that don't have a membrane, sometimes they'll even put a membrane in the beginning part where you drive in. So the worst of the stuff that falls off hits the membrane, and then there's less that hits the garage. That's a way to kind of balance costs versus effectiveness. But the garage is bombarded with salt all the time from the tires. Now, coastal buildings are much more susceptible to corrosion. That's anything, the steel, concrete, the steel within the concrete. But a parking garage in New York, in Manhattan, is not going to have less exposure than one on the water in Brooklyn or Queens or something. It's the salt's the problem. But if you have a building on the water that doesn't have a parking garage and doesn't have road salts, but has coastal air with high humidity and salt in the air, that the same problems you see in the parking garage are going to be present there.
So if when you find something that could be, you go into one of these garages and they haven't been inspected in a number of years, and all of a sudden you see something, can you tell how long it can go before that repair? If the repair isn't done, there could be a major collapse or some kind of major problem.
To some degree, but that's actually interesting question, because that's a actual requirement of filing the report. If you identify something as safe with maintenance or safe with monitoring, you have to put in the report how long it can go before it will become unsafe, which is much more of an art than a science. Certainly there's experience and you can use some factors to kind of estimate that, but there's not a formula you can plug things into to come up with an exact number on that. They're really relying on the engineer's judgment.
I don't know. The whole thing gets me a little nervous.
Oh, what I can tell you, as I said a lot after the collapse in Florida, there are very large factors of safety on everything we do. We have incredibly high standards, very much like you had said before. If a doctor screws up, somebody dies. If we screw up a stadium, 70,000 people could die. Right. So we have very the level where something is concerning to us is way, way, way before it's actually physically concerning. So there's big factors of safety, and yes, there's a lot of stuff out there that is not in great condition. but that is why we have the big factors of safety on it. So, it's in the United States, it is a national major news story if a building collapses. It's incredibly rare. There are buildings all up and down the coast from Miami to Maine that are in various conditions, and one of them collapsed in the past, 50 years, 40 years, whatever, since the prior one to Surfside. So, there's, I would say, yes, these are legitimate concerns, and yes, the world is waking up to them, and yes, things are going to improve, and all these buildings are going to get inspected, and this is going to spread. But we are not in the middle of an epidemic of buildings just collapsing in the middle of the night, and hopefully it stays that way.
Right.
But think of how many buildings there are and how often you hear of one collapsing. It's
right. Actually, it's like major news nowadays if something like that does happen, like that one in Florida. I mean, that was like a shock that a building would collapse. No one even thinks about it.
Correct. It's a very, very rare thing. I mean, it does happen in other countries that don't have the standards we have. A lot of times it happens during construction. A lot of times minor earthquakes will cause major damage because the buildings aren't designed for that. And you do get collapses of buildings sometimes in other countries. It's still rare, but here it's rarest of rare.
But now you have a lot of the newer constructions of these major skyscrapers they're building, and they're building the garages underneath.
Yeah, that's common in older buildings too. I mean, a lot of the garages I've looked at so far as part of the local law 126 inspections are under big buildings. And that's, as I started with, that's very important because those slabs of those garages are bracing the heaviest, the lower the columns in those buildings, the more load is on them because it's cumulative as you go down. Each floor adds to the load. The heaviest part of that column, the heaviest load that column is going to see is in the basement and the sub basement. That's where the parking garage is. So that slab is very important because the strength of a column is dependent upon its unbraced length much more than its size in many cases. So that could really create a problem if that slab goes away.
Well, it's a kind of an amazing thing because when I think about a garage being built on under this 50-story building or even higher, what supports all that weight? That's that one.
It's easy in Manhattan. It's all on bedrock, so you typically bring the foundation down to the bedrock, and that's why there's so many tall buildings because the foundations are a little simpler when you can put it on rock. Simpler for a building of that size, but yeah, I mean, it's the soil. There's a whole branch of engineering that deals with nothing but soil and rocks and making sure that what the building is on can hold it. Geotechnical engineering, that's what they do.
I mean, that's an amazing challenge. I'm sure.
Yeah, it can get very complicated, and one of the tricky parts about it is you can't see. So they do borings and sampling and testing, but you really never know what's under there. So they usually get it right, but it's
well, I hope so.
Well, they got to follow their standards, but you can do testing and shows one thing, and they build it and something else happens because they were 1 foot over from where they had to be to show there was a problem.
But that's like New York and in Boston, where they build these enormous buildings right on the coastline. Mm-hmm. I mean, the salt water has to seep in underground sometimes.
Salt water is incredibly corrosive. I've been at the Jersey Shore my entire life, and we can't have anything outside. Like the bikes last several years max, and then they turn into rust puddles. The outdoor furniture, you can't have anything with metal in it, or it rusts out in 3 years. It's it's an incredibly corrosive environment on a ocean coast.
So what kind of materials would you use in a build like that?
Well, I mean, you can use concrete if it's protected, and you can use steel if it's protected. I mean, the issue is more so protecting the materials from the elements. There's nothing inherently wrong with using them, but if you spend the money to properly coat and protect the concrete and maintain it, it'll be fine. If you enclose the steel, can paint it or galvanize it, but you're generally not going to do that for a whole building. It'd be expensive. But if you protect it, it'll be fine. But Mother Nature has a way of getting to things no matter what is the problem.
So before they put these laws in place, were the private owners hiring you to go and inspect their properties?
Sometimes,
Responsible owners.
yeah, responsible. I mean, a lot, and this is something these laws in Florida are seeking to address, and there's certainly a lot of different sides to this, and certainly can understand an owner that just has mandates imposed on them, or a condo board or condo association that is suddenly told you have to pay X to fix the building. But a lot of times what would happen is somebody would see something, they'd call an engineer. The engineer would look at it and say, you have to do a further investigation. You have this, that, and the other. And you would do that, give them a report, tell them what they had to do, what it was going to cost. And then they looked at their reserves, which they weren't funding properly. Part of the laws in Florida now do require reserve studies and to fully fund the reserves. And there's state programs to help with that, low cost loans and things to get these repairs done. Because it can be, you have a 10-unit building that needs a lot of work. That's only divided by 10 people. That can be a big number. But a lot of times they'd start fighting. The condo association and the owners would start suing each other over what the bylaws said and who was responsible for what. Some owners would refuse to do it, or they had to have a massive assessment that nobody could pay. I mean, we've had buildings where condo association was bankrupt and at the same time needed to spend $1 million on the building, and none of the owners could afford it. And, it becomes a big problem. So a lot of the stuff was just getting deferred and deferred and deferred. I've seen it many, many times. And in Florida, that building had prior reports and prior people tell them they needed to do stuff. And they had I don't know all the specifics, but they deferred. This is the, extreme result of what could happen.
Well, wouldn't the state put in some kind of a condemn the building, or
the engineer would have a responsibility if the condition was dangerous, like flat out, this building is not safe. The engineer would have a responsibility to call the building department and let them know, and the building department would probably shut the building down until it was fixed. That happened in Atlantic City not too long ago, actually. That really the onus was on the engineer. Like the building had to realize they had a problem, call an engineer. The engineer had to discover that problem, and then the onus was on the engineer to report it. And there was no easy path to that. Now that it's mandated, then all these buildings are going to have to proactively be inspected, and the reports have to get filed with the city. If the city doesn't have a report, they're going to know something's up, or they're going to fine the building. And so now at least there's a different path to get there, and also a way to make sure everything is okay. Before it was more, we're only coming out if there's a problem. Now at least you'll get and one of the good things about that is if you have regular screenings of the building with a same engineer, you'll be able to see things coming ahead of time and plan for them. And even though like we could do an inspection now and say you don't have any problems, but here's a list of things you might want to budget for in the next 5 years, so you don't have problems 5 years from now. And it's a lot better for a building or a parking garage, any kind of real estate, to manage it in that way rather than wait for there to be a fire, then spend the money on putting it out.
Right. So what a lot of the pressures are all on the engineer.
Yeah, and more so now, because there's obviously the liability of after you've inspected that building, something does go wrong.
Yeah, that's a big responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, how is that on companies like yours? That's a burden as far as the cost. Now you have to be insured.
Correct. That's no
Heavily.
different than, it's no different than before. I mean, whether we're doing it because the owner asks us to do it and we're signing off on it, or whether we're designing the building from scratch before it's built, or whether we're doing it because of a program like this or a law like this, it's the same liability. I mean, we're still on the hook for it, and that hasn't changed. So, I mean, we've always had insurance for that. This certainly could drive the rates up, which, certainly could drive uh, our costs up, which will drive our prices up. That's certainly a possibility. But it's not new insurance or new, it's nothing new to this business.
Right. Well, I do feel a little safer now. It's a scary thought, and no one ever thought about any of this until that building collapsed in Florida.
Take it for
I mean,
granted.
you just take it for granted. This is built by people that know what they're doing. And when I go in there, it's designed to be able to hold everything that's in place.
Well, we do have a saying. It's that we're structural engineers are saving lives every time the wind blows, because you just don't realize it. But every time the wind blows on that building and it doesn't fall over, that's because we did our job. So
That's right.
you do take it for granted, though. That's the point.
Right. I mean, I would take it for granted because, I've just assumed there's guys like you that know what they're doing and they do the right thing, and, it's safe for everyone. But, I never would have thought of anything like that, like I said, until that building collapsed in Florida.
Well, unfortunately, that's some of our greatest lessons we've learned, not just in building and construction, but aviation and other things that are just incredibly safe now, have come from disasters and failures. And the more that happens, the more you learn. And it's not good, but that's just the nature. Once it does happen, it already happened, and you learn from it, and that's one less thing you generally have to worry about in the future once you learn your lesson from that one.
Yeah, that's why I asked the questions about the signage that this has been expected this year at on 8/1 or something like that. But if you drove into a garage today, do you look at anything that or you just take it for granted yourself?
No, I notice things when I'm not. I mean, it's almost subliminal, because I see something out of the corner of my eye that doesn't look right, and then I'll look at it. I certainly see garages are, again, notorious for issues, because just they're people don't take care of them like they take care of an office building that has nice finishes in it. They're a garage, and people don't notice if something looks a little dirty or rusty or whatever. They're not Doesn't necessarily look that out of place in a parking garage, right?
Right.
But I mean, I've seen every garage has minor problems, but there's ones I've driven in, and you see like the holes in the beam, like the beam is rusted out and there's a giant hole in it. I know where that hole is a problem or not. So, but no,
Right.
the general public would have no idea. There's certain places you can rust a hole through a beam and it'll be fine, and there's others the building will fall down. So, but I don't go looking for it, but you see it. Yeah, I can't.
But you would notice something's not right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct.
So I'm going to follow you next time I go into the garage.
Just call me when they're double parked, and I'll give you the address, and I'll let you know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it probably would never happen. Well, I shouldn't say never happen, but very slim chance that it would ever happen again, hopefully, because of the laws that they're putting in place. And it's you don't want to think you're taking your life in your own hands when you're pulling into these places, but in reality, anything can happen, no matter what. Like you said, engineers, they make the wind, that's could knock over the building. But
New York City has got to be the most, especially with buildings and like laws and regulations, but probably one of the most regulated places on earth. And I'm generally not a fan of over regulation, but when you see like the dense parts of Manhattan, what one city block, what goes on is more than some mid-sized cities in the country, and you have that much stuff going on, and that many people, and that many buildings, that many cars and bikes, and everything else that goes on. I kind of have a little soft spot for some of the regulations, because you could have some serious problems if you didn't. So.
Yeah, and that's a good point because the area is such a small area compared to what they built on, what they built up on it.
Right.
It's uh and it's just amazing how the ground can support it.
Yeah. Yep. Well, it's all down on rock, so it's a mountain down there. Basically, you can picture it that way. Like most of those buildings are on piles or other foundations that go down to that rock. So you can just picture them built on top of a mountain. Basically, they bypass the dirt. You know.
Right. Well, it's like here, I'm in Boston, and they call it the Big Dig,
Yeah.
where they
Familiar.
built the tunnel right under the city.
Hmm.
So all the buildings are sitting on top of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Driving through there, and I always wonder, that's got to be an amazing. You
That was
guys,
a very famous great engineering feat at the time when it was done. It was a big deal what they pulled off there. Yeah. And after all that, they had one problem, and it was with the anchors for the ceiling were not intended to be permanently loaded, and there was one fatality, I believe, where a
right?
ceiling fell. Which after all that crazy engineering and building a tunnel underneath buildings, that turned out to be the only problem they had was interesting. But that was again a lesson learned because of that. The type of anchor they used was not intended to be permanently pulled on, by suspending the weight of something.
Right.
So you're now not allowed to use that type of anchor in that application. And it's a lesson learned. But unfortunately there had to be an accident to learn it.
Yeah, it's just I give you guys a lot of credit. Engineers they have an amazing skill to be able to build things like that. You know, Actually, you're not doing the building. You're just designing how they should build that,
Correct.
which is pretty amazing. So I give you a lot of credit for that.
Thank you.
And and I also I'm glad to hear about the laws they're putting in place for these public garages because I wasn't aware that they didn't do a annual inspection
I'm
or a
sure
multi-annual inspection.
I'm sure it'll be becoming more and more common, and Massachusetts is not too far behind New York in terms of loving to regulate things. So I'm sure it'll be up your way soon.
Yeah, and hopefully they'll make those signs.
Exactly. You should reach out to your representatives and tell them when they pass the law in Massachusetts, they should require signs. It's not a bad idea.
No, it should be,
You
because
guys can lead the way.
yeah, I'll be in charge of that. Well, I don't if someone is interested in getting more information, Joe, how would they get a hold of you?
Sure. Our website is structuralworkshop.com. It's all one word, www.structuralworkshop.com.
Okay.
And,
And and if they were in a different part of the country and they wanted to get some you to do some of that work out where they are, you can do
yeah,
that.
we do. We work all over the country. Not licensed in every state, but large enough projects we will get licensed for, and we're licensed in 30 states, and we have an office in Florida, as I said. So any not only the New York stuff, but anything in Florida where these buildings need to be recertified, we're really starting to do a lot of that now, and that's there's not a lot of people. Well, shouldn't say that. There's a lot of people doing it, but basically every building in Florida has to be inspected. So you could imagine the demand versus the amount of people that are doing it. But sure, we always ask because we rarely say no.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Joe, for coming on. We're talking with Joe. I'm going to try your name again. It's pretty easy, but Joe DiPompeo.
That'll work. That's good.
Yeah, okay. And you're a structural workshop.
Yeah,
I'll get it right
that's all right. You're from
eventually.
Boston. It's okay. We give you a little slack.
Okay. I
I
appreciate
was
it.
waiting the whole show to get one of them in. So
Yeah, well, I'm getting let me try one more. DiPompeo. There
good.
you go. Okay. It takes a little practice, That's all. Well, thank you again,
Thank you for
Joe.
having me.
And I'm Rick Kaplan with the New York Real Estate Journal. Until next time.